Good afternoon, everybody. I think there are around 70 people who have applied for this webinar. I think we'll just wait for 2 or 3 minutes more, and then we'll begin. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa from CIRS. I'm responsible for chemical regulations in EU and Asian Pacific regions. Today, I'm going to talk about the adjustment of data requirements under MEP Order 7. I'm from CIRS. We are a company headquartered in Hangzhou, China. We also have branches in Beijing, Nanjing, Ireland, and Washington, D.C. Currently, we have around 200 employees. We are dedicated to provide best regulation services worldwide in industrial chemicals, cosmetics, pesticides, biocides, food, and medical devices. Today, I'm going to talk about the MEP Order 7 guidelines data requirements. On August 31st, 2017, Ministry of Environmental Protection of People's Republic of China, which is MEP, announced the adjustment of data requirements for new substance notification guidance, which is also known as MEP Order 7. This guidelines revision has long begun in 2014. It went through public hearings and industrial association consultancy, and finally it was released. MEP revised the minimum requirements and exemption conditions for physical property, toxicological data, and ecotoxicological data. The announcement will be put into force on October 15, 2017. On the condition that the original guidance is inconsistent with the announcement should prevail. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the changes in the following order. Firstly, briefly on the physical properties, and then healthy toxicology and ecotoxicology. So, firstly, physical properties. Some minor changes have been seen in this physical property data requirements. Firstly, for example, in auto ignition temperature, in the old version guidance, the exemption condition was substance that belong to non-flammable liquids can be exempted. In the new version of the guidance, they explain the non-flammable liquid as liquid with flash point greater than 200 degrees Celsius. This kind of liquid can be regarded as non-flammable liquid and thus can be exempted from handing in auto ignition temperature data. And also in the old version, solid that will only be self-heating preliminarily when the temperature reaches 400 degrees Celsius with melting point less than 116 degrees Celsius can be exempted. This is translated from REACH regulation, EU REACH, and there are some translation errors. Hence, in the new version, they've kind of get it right. So the exemption condition is changed to solid that will not be self-heating rather than will be. Okay, and for oxidative property, the previous version said the exemption condition was the substance that is incapable of reacting exothermically with combustible materials. In the new version, they explain the scenario. That is to say, based on the chemical structure of the substance, if the substance is an organic substance and then it contains oxygen or halogen atom but not directly bound to nitrogen or oxygen, or else if it is an inorganic chemical without oxygen or halogen atoms, this kind of substance can be regarded as incapable of reacting exothermically with combustible materials, and thus can be exempted from handling an oxidative property test. In the old version, as for solid, if it is clearly proved to be oxidative through a preliminary test, then it is not necessary to conduct a complete test. However, this has been deleted in the new version of the guidance. That is to say, if a solid that has been proved to be oxidative or has some tendency to be, then you need to hand in a complete test on the oxidative property, as this is a very important property regarding to the hazard. Right, these are the physical property amendments. Now we're going on to healthy toxicology. For old version regulations, from level 1 to level 4 registration, acute toxicity study, including by oral, by dermal, and by inhalation, are all required. In the new version, however, for level 1 registration, only one acute toxicity study is required, and here by oral is recommended. However, from level 2 registration, 3 acute toxicity study reports are required to be handed in. For skin corrosion and sensitization, the previous exemption condition was acute dermal toxicity is highly toxic, and now in the new version, they've more specified the highly toxicity to acute dermal toxicity category 1, which is clearer and is easy to follow. And same-wise for eye irritation, in the old version, it only said skin irritation toxicity is medium and above for skin corrosion. And in the new version, they say the exemption condition is substance with skin irritation category 2 or and above for skin corrosion. So they've kind of quantified the criteria. And move on to more for, say, 28-day repeated dose toxicity. this test is required in level 1, was required in level 1 and to level 4 registration in the old version. And after the new announcement, the 28-day repeated dose toxicity is no longer required in level 1 registration, which is a good news to our enterprises because we don't need to pay money to do the test anymore for level 1 registration. Skin corrosion. If your substance is skin corrosive, then you do not need to hand in acute dermal toxicity or acute inhalation toxicity or 28-day repeated dose dermal toxicity test anymore, which makes sense. If it's skin corrosive, then it will kind of torture the testing animal, and it kind of relieves the testing animal from being tortured. Before the acute, if in the older version, if substance is skin corrosion, then only acute oral toxicity and 28-day repeated dose oral toxicity can be exempted. And for acute inhalation toxicity and 28-day repeated dose inhalation toxicity, the exemption condition has been lowered. So previously, the substance with vapor pressure less than 0.01 pascal at 20 degrees Celsius can be exempted. Now, only substance with vapor pressure less than 0.1 pascal at 20 degrees Celsius can be exempted. This is because substance with larger than 0.1 pascal vapor pressure, they will not tend to reach a concentration where will lead to inhalation. So you get what I mean, right? So for the second exemption condition, they define the inhalable particle. So previously, the exemption condition was inhalable particle less than 1% by weight, and the MMAD of the floating particle droplets generated during the application is larger than 100 micrometer. And they further, in the new version, they further kind of define the particle that is inhalable to be particles with a diameter less than 10 micrometer. This kind of particles belongs to inhalable particles. And for 28-day repeated dose oral toxicity, another exemption condition has been added. If you have a repeated dose toxicity study and screening study for reproductive developmental toxicity test, then you do not need to do the 28-day repeated dose oral toxicity anymore. The previous exemption condition was you have reliable study material of 19-day repeated dose toxicity, oral toxicity study or chronic oral toxicity test. So here, enterprises have one more choice to choose from as to whether which experiment to carry out. And also for mutagenicity, one exemption has been added. If in vivo genetic toxicity test is available, then in vitro genetic toxicity test with the same endpoints can be exempted. No such exemption condition was mentioned in the old version. Let's take a closer view on the mutagenicity test. So previously, for level 1 registration, in vitro chromosome aberration test is required. However, in the new version, it's no longer required. Only bacteria reverse mutation test is required for level 1 registration. If in level 1 registration, the bacteria reverse mutation test is positive and the substance has widespread usage, then a higher stage mutagenicity test should be submitted. As you can see, this is a tier-by-tier experimental scheme. For example, for level 2 registration, bacteria reverse mutation and in vitro chromosome aberration testing, both of them are mandatory. You have to take it if you are registered in level 2 registration. If both of the above mentioned 2 experiments are negative, then and plus in vitro gene mutation are positive, as we can see on the row 2 for level 2 registration, then a further in vivo gene mutation need to be carried out. So, which is to say that which experiment to be carried out should be dependent on the previous experiment result. This table is kind of quite complex. I'm not going into deep in this presentation, but you can have a look at this table later on. And you can, if you have any questions, you can email me regarding this table. Also, for 19-day repeated dose toxicity, this is not required for level 2 registration anymore. Previously, it was. And one more exemption condition has been added for this category. If one substance is with carcinogenicity category 1 or 2, then can be exempted from submitting 19-day repeated dose toxicity. Also, if you've already carried out 28-day repeated dose toxicity test, and you've seen toxic effect in the 28-day repeated dose toxicity test using the same testing animal and exposure route, or the no observed adverse effect level is very low, which is to say that the toxicity, it is highly toxic, the substance, right? If the NOAEL is very low. And then in this scenario, you can be exempted, well, the substance, which is highly toxic, can be exempted from doing 19-day repeated dose toxicity study. Here they also explain the low NOAEL level, which refers to 28 repeated dose toxicity non-observed effect level for by oral. It's less than 100 mg per kilogram. If it's by dermal, then it's less than 200 mg per kilogram, and vice versa, and hence you can see below. For reproductive and developmental toxicity study, for level 2 registration, extended 1-generation reproductive toxicity study can be handed in instead of 2-generation reproductive toxicity study, or pregnancy and developmental toxicity study, or reproductive developmental screening study. That is to say, if an enterprise want to do level 2 registration, the enterprise can choose 1 experiment out from 4, as I mentioned before. However, previously for level 2 registration, enterprises were only allowed to choose 1 out from 3. So they've added extended 1-generation reproductive toxicity study as another option. And for level 3 registration, pregnancy and developmental toxicity data is mandatory. And enterprises can choose from 2-generation reproductive toxicity study or extended 1-generation reproductive toxicity study. And which means you have 1 more option too for level 3 registration. Because previously for level 3 registration, you have to do 2-generation reproductive toxicity study and pregnancy developmental toxicity study. And specifically for those companies who have already carried out REACH registration, and they must have extended 1-generation reproductive toxicity study, it is very convenient. You can just take that experimental result to do a Chinese registration. And for toxicokinetics, from level 2 registration, evaluation on toxicokinetics based on relevant information is required. That's the original word, which indicates that the acceptability for toxicokinetics evaluation is higher than before. We don't need to do toxicokinetics experiments anymore, which is quite time-consuming and it's quite expensive to do too. And instead, we can do QSAR, read across. Such kind of evaluations will shorten the time for the whole registration process and also lower the cost. For chronic toxicity, if you have done 19-day repeated dose toxicity study before, and you've seen system toxicity effect, the no observed adverse effect level higher than 300 mg per kilogram, which is to say that the toxicity level is very low, then you don't need to do the chronic toxicity study anymore. However, there are some exceptions here listed. In the scenario that the toxicity could not be detected by the 19-day repeated dose toxicity test, either because of the specific molecular structure of the substance or because of the experimental design, then in this scenario, chronic toxicity test is still to be handed in. Another 2 new exemption conditions has been added to chronic toxicity. One is if you have sufficient toxicokinetics data to illustrate that the long-term toxicity of the substance, then you will not require to hand in the chronic toxicity study. Or if you have already carried out combined tests of chronic toxicity and carcinogenicity, then you don't need to do it again because you have done it before, basically. So previously the low level, the no observed adverse level of repeated dose is very high. It's just it's not quantified. Now they give you a quantification, and which makes it easier to follow. And the older version exemption condition has been deleted, which says the classification of system toxicity of specific target organ belongs to non-classified. This one does not exist anymore in the new version. Further on to carcinogenicity. Okay, the decision to whether you should do a carcinogenicity test or to carry out a carcinogenicity evaluation should be based on the substance mutagenicity and repeated dose toxicity, and also the exposure scenario. For example, when a substance has widespread dispersed use, or there is evidence of frequent or long-term human exposure, or it belongs to germ cell mutagen category 2, or it has been proved to be a germ cell mutagen category 2. Oh, sorry. Or it has been proved in repeated dose toxicity study to be able to induce proliferation or precancerous lesions. In these scenarios, then you should hand in a carcinogenicity test. In other situations, carcinogenicity evaluation is enough. However, if in the carcinogenicity evaluation, it indicates that carcinogenicity test is necessary, then you have to do it. Well, you have to hand in the carcinogenicity test result. And also, there are 2 more exemption conditions being added to carcinogenicity test. One is that if the substance is classified as germ cell mutagen category 1A or 1B, then you do not need to do carcinogenicity anymore. Another one is if you have done a combined test of chronic toxicity and carcinogenicity, then you don't need to do it again. Basically, you've done it before, as I said before, for the mutagenicity. Okay, it's going too far. So far, so good. We finished on the healthy toxicology, and now we will talk about a bit more about ecotoxicology. In the previous version, the prolonged 14-day toxicity testing on fish was required for level 2 registration. And now this test has been totally deleted. You don't need to do anything like this after the new announcement. And for chronic toxicity test in fish, previously for level 3 and 4, at least one of the 3 tests listed here, which is fish early life stage toxicity test, fish short-term toxicity test on embryo and sacrifice stages, and fish the V growth test, one of this should be submitted at least for level 3 and level 4 registration. And in the new announcement, for level 3 registration, you can choose one from, you can also choose one from 3, basically it's not changed. But for level 4 registration, you are mandatory to hand in fish the V growth test. So that is to say for level 3 registration, you don't need to do anything different from the old version. But for level 4, you have to hand in fish the V growth test. Yeah, under the new guidance. And for level 4 registration, there is a new data requirement coming out, which is called anti-treat reproductive test, or earthworm reproductive test. This test is a new test. It was not in the old version, and this test is only required when the acute terrestrial toxicity test result shows hazardous classification. This is a rare case, to be honest, and it's very rare that you need to do this new test during the level 4 registration. And for terrestrial toxicity, previous versions that the exemption condition was substance with very low soil adsorption. And in the new version, they specified the low soil adsorption. It means that substance with very low soil absorption, which refers to log KOC lower than 1.5. They've quantified this. It's easier to kind of decide how low the soil adsorption needs to be when it comes to be exempted. And for respiration inhibition toxicity in activated sludge, previously it was the exemption condition was no microorganism toxicity occurs under the circumstance of saturated concentration of the new substance, for example, if the solubility is very low. And here they've explained the no microorganism toxicity, which means if no toxicity is observed in soil microorganism carbon nitrogen transfer test, then it can be regarded as with no microorganism toxicity, and thus can be exempted from submitting respiration inhibition toxicity in activated sludge test. And for adsorption and desorption, previous the exemption condition was substance and its degrading material degrade rapidly. And in the new version, they've kind of defined the rapidability to the substance has hydrolysis half-life less than 12 hours. This kind of substance can be regarded as degrade rapidly and thus can be exempted from absorption and desorption testing. Right. Moving on to right. In some fish acute toxicity test and Daphnia acute toxicity test and some other tests, there is one exemption condition listed here, which says biological membrane cannot be passed through. In the new version, they require reports on the biofilm transmission of the corresponding substance or its analog. If in some scenario the experiments cannot be carried out, you need to clarify the reasons and provide software prediction report or literature data to say that why this experiment cannot be carried out. For fish acute toxicity and Daphnia magna acute toxicity, previous exemption condition was that if you can see acute toxicity in long-term toxicity data, previously they only say that if they process long-term toxicity data in the same test life species. But in the new version, they emphasize on the valid acute toxicity information. For example, for fish acute toxicity, if you want to get exempted from this, then you need to provide, for example, you need to provide a 40-day fish prolonged toxicity test. And at the same time, you need to provide valid acute toxicity information in this test. For example, if you have seen toxicity in early days, say 3 days after, in the 14-day fish prolonged toxicity test. And it goes the same for Daphnia magna reproductive test. If you can send acute toxicity in the reproductive test, then you are exempted from Daphnia magna acute toxicity study, which is more scientific and reasonable. Okay, that's all the changes. So conclusion, as you can see in this presentation, the new version has simplified the data requirements, and they've quantified some technical criteria, and it also relieves the enterprise's registration burden. And also, I think China is taking a step further in regulating chemical industry, but it also takes into consideration the adaptability for the enterprises. So, yeah, that's all for today. And thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, you can telephone me at this number listed here, or you can write an email to me. I'm very happy to discuss any questions with you, and hopefully we can learn from each other. And thank you. That's the end for today. And thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.